Settle in now and let the lamp burn low. Tonight, I'll tell you of a man who won not by being the boldest, nor the cleverest, but by outlasting them all. There is an old riddle they tell about 3 great lords of Japan and a little bird that will not sing. It says a great deal, and we shall come to it in time. The first lord said, "If the bird will not sing, I shall kill it." The second said, "If it will not sing, I shall make it sing." And the third only said, "I shall wait." The first 2 you may already know, the Demon King and the peasant who became a lord. But it is the third, the waiting one, whose story we tell tonight. His name was Tokugawa Ieyasu, and by simply refusing to break, he would end 100 years of war and hold all Japan in his 2 steady hands. Sit back, here is how. First, you must understand the world he was born into. They called it the Sengoku, the age of the country at war. For 100 years, Japan had torn itself apart. No true emperor ruled it, no shogun held it. Only the daimyo, the warlords, each carving out his patch of land, each hungry for more, each ready to devour a weaker neighbor. And into that world, in 1543, in a small and battered province called Mikawa, a boy was born to a minor clan, the Matsudaira, a weak house caught between giants. To the east lay the mighty Imagawa, to the west the rising Oda, and little Mikawa lay squarely between them, like a grain of rice between 2 millstones. His father was young and his grip was weak. To survive at all, the little clan had to lean on the great Imagawa lord, and the price of that protection was cruel. The price was the boy himself. At just 5 years old, the child was sent away as a hostage, a living pledge of his clan's loyalty, and so his long ordeal began. But even that went wrong. On the road, the little boy was seized by the rival Oda clan, who tried to use him against his own father. His father, hard as stone, refused to yield. "Do as you like with the child," his father is said to have answered. "It only proves my loyalty runs deeper than my blood." A chilling thing to hear of one's own son. The boy lived, and in time, through a prisoner exchange, he passed at last into the hands of the great Imagawa, where he had been meant to go all along. And there, in the Imagawa capital, he would spend the whole of his childhood, a well-kept prisoner, a guest who could never leave, a pawn in other men's games. Now another child might have been broken by it, but this boy watched and listened and learned. He studied the Imagawa court, its strengths, its rot, and said little. He was schooled in war and letters, in the Zen calm of the sword, in falconry and patience. He grew from a hostage child into a lame, quiet, capable young man. And through it all he learned the deepest lesson of his life, that the weak survive by enduring, that the patient man who bends and waits may outlast the proud man who will not. Then, when he was a young man of about 18, the great Imagawa lord marched west to war, meaning to crush the upstart Oda and march on the capital. He took his young hostage vassal along. The young man was given the dangerous work, leading the vanguard, delivering supplies to a forward fort under the enemy's nose. He did it well and coolly, as he did everything. And then came the thunderbolt. In a narrow gorge called Okehazama, in a sudden summer storm, the young Oda Nobunaga fell upon the resting Imagawa host and cut its great lord down. In a single afternoon, the giant was dead, the great army shattered and fleeing, and the young hostage vassal suddenly found himself, for the first time in his life, entirely free. He did not run wild with it. He rode quietly home to Mikawa, to the little castle of his fathers, and took up at last the clan that had been waiting a lifetime for him. He was his own man now. Now here was the first great choice of his life. The Imagawa were finished, the Oda were rising. A lesser man might have clung to old loyalties out of pride. He did not. Instead, he did the shrewd, unsentimental thing. He made peace with the man who had killed his old master, the fierce and brilliant Oda Nobunaga, and swore an alliance with him. It was an alliance that would last more than 20 years, unbroken until death. In all the treachery of that treacherous age, it was a rare and remarkable thing, a bond that held. While Nobunaga blazed across Japan, burning temples and breaking armies, the patient young Tokugawa guarded his eastern flank, loyal and dependable, asking little, giving much. He set to work on his own small province, too. He put down the rebels within it, tamed a great uprising of warrior monks and farmers, and forged his rough Mikawa men into some of the finest soldiers in Japan. For his men loved him. He was no glittering tyrant like his ally. He shared their hardships, remembered their names, and did not throw their lives away. Loyalty, he knew, was worth more than fear. But loyalty to Nobunaga could cut a man to the bone. For the Demon King was suspicious as well as brilliant, and one day that suspicion fell upon the Tokugawa house itself. Word reached Nobunaga of a plot that Ieyasu's own wife and his eldest son and heir, Nobuyasu, was scheming with his enemies, the Taikō. Whether it was true, no one can now say. And Nobunaga, hard and unbending, demanded a terrible thing. He ordered his loyal ally to put his own wife to death and his own son to take his life. It was the price of the alliance. Imagine the weight of that. A man who had endured a childhood in chains, now told to destroy his own family to keep the peace. And imagine having to decide. He bowed to it, cold, unbearable, and necessary. That was how he judged it. His wife was killed, and his young son, barely a man, obeyed his father and took his own life. He never spoke much of it after, but those who knew him say it left a mark that never healed. He had learned, again, the oldest lesson of his life, that survival has a price and you pay it. Now I must tell you of the darkest day of his soldiering, the day he was beaten so badly he nearly lost everything, and how, even in ruin, he found a way to grow. For to his north sat the most feared warlord in all Japan, Taikō Shinjin, master of the deadliest cavalry the islands had ever seen. And in 1572, that Taiga came south. Shinjin marched his great army straight past young Tokugawa's castle as if he were beneath notice, and that the proud young lord could not bear. Against all wise counsel, he rode out to fight. It was a mistake, and he knew it almost at once. On a windswept plateau called Mikatagahara, in the falling snow of a winter evening, the Taikō cavalry crashed into his smaller force. It was a slaughter. His lines buckled and broke. Men died all around him. His army dissolved into the snow and the dark, and the great Taikō host rolled over them like a wave. Ieyasu himself fled for his life, hunted through the freezing dusk with only a few riders. They say he was so shaken he fouled himself in the saddle and never once tried to hide it. Back inside his castle, half his men lost, he did an odd and cunning thing. He threw the gates wide open, lit great fires, and beat the drums as if inviting the enemy in. The Taikō scouts, suspecting a trap, drew back into the dark. And then, they say, the shaken young lord called for a painter and had his own frightened face set down, a portrait to shame himself with and never forget. He survived Mikatagahara, for fortune spared him. The great Taikō Shinjin fell sick and died on campaign not long after, and the tiger that had nearly destroyed him was simply gone. In time, Ieyasu and Nobunaga together broke the Taikō for good, at a place called Nagashino, where lines of matchlock guns tore the proud cavalry to pieces. The old world of the horse was ending. And so, by patience and loyalty, the Tokugawa lord had endured into calmer years. His ally ruled half of Japan and was reaching for the rest. Their long partnership seemed unshakable. Then, in the summer of 1582, everything shattered in a single night. In a Kyoto temple called Honno-ji, one of Nobunaga's own trusted generals turned traitor, and the Demon King died in the flames. And at that very moment, Tokugawa Ieyasu was far from home, deep in Nobunaga's own territory, with only a small handful of attendants and no army at all to protect him. The land was in chaos. Bandits and rebels rose everywhere to prey on stragglers. To reach his own province, he had to cross the wild mountains of Iga on foot, hunted every step of the way. It was one of the most dangerous flights of his life. With a few loyal men and the help of local mountain warriors, he slipped through the passes and reached home alive. Once again, the patient man had endured. Now the great prize lay open. Nobunaga was dead, his empire suddenly masterless, and a dozen ambitious lords lunged for the top, but one moved faster than them all. It was the peasant, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the small, grinning sandal-bearer who had risen from nothing to become Nobunaga's finest general. He avenged his lord in days and seized his power. Ieyasu watched the little man rise with careful eyes. And when at last the two came to blows, at a place called Kamaki, the patient Tokugawa gave the risen peasant a hard, bloody lesson. For Ieyasu fought Hideyoshi's larger army to a standstill and bloodied it badly. On the battlefield, the patient man had proven he could not simply be swept aside. He was too good and too solid. But Ieyasu was wise as well as tough. He saw that Hideyoshi's tide could not be stopped, only ridden. And so, rather than fight a war he could not win, he did the hardest thing of all. He bowed. He made his peace and became Hideyoshi's vassal, his greatest and most powerful vassal. He swallowed his pride, took the lower seat, and settled in to wait. He was very, very good at waiting. Now Hideyoshi did a thing meant to weaken him, a poisoned gift dressed as a reward. He ordered Ieyasu to give up his ancestral lands and move far east to a wild and backward region called the Kanto. It was meant as an exile of sorts. The Kanto was marshy, remote, far from the capital and its power. At its heart sat only a small, half-ruined fishing town beside a swampy bay. Its name was Edo. Any other lord would have grieved to leave his homeland for such a place. Ieyasu looked at that swamp and saw a foundation. Where others saw exile, the patient man saw a blank page and room to build. So he set to work. He drained the marshes, cut canals, raised embankments, and laid out a great new castle town on the mud. Slowly, patiently, the swamp of Edo began to become a city. And that town he raised on the marsh would one day become the greatest city in all Japan, the seat of his line, the heart of the nation, the place we now call Tokyo. While Hideyoshi ruled and warred and dreamed ever grander dreams, Ieyasu quietly grew strong in the east, richer, better organized, more secure. He asked for nothing, offended no one, and waited. For Hideyoshi, the risen peasant, had climbed as high as any man in Japan ever had. He ruled it all, unified at last. But at the summit, his judgment began to fail him. In his old age, he grew proud and strange. He launched two vast, ruinous invasions of Korea across the sea, bloody, costly failures that drained his realm and broke his armies for nothing. And worst of all, for most of his life, he had no heir. Then, late and unlooked for, a son was born to him, a tiny boy named Hideyori, and the old ruler's whole world narrowed to that one small child. For Hideyoshi knew he was dying, and his heir was a babe in arms. So he did what dying rulers always do. He begged his greatest lords to swear, again and again, to protect the child until he came of age. And the greatest and most powerful of those lords, the one whose oath mattered most, was the patient man in the east. Tokugawa Ieyasu swore with the rest to guard the little heir. And then, in 1598, Hideyoshi died. And with the great man gone, and only a 5-year-old child to rule in his place, all the old rivalries came flooding back. The peace Hideyoshi built began, at once, to crack. The realm split slowly into two great camps. On one side stood the loyal officials of the dead ruler, who wished to guard the child's inheritance against all comers. Their leader was a proud, brilliant, unbending administrator named Ishida Mitsunari, a man of iron principle, respected but cold and loved by few. He saw the danger in the east clearly. And on the other side, drawing lords to himself with lands and marriages and patient courtesy, stood the old tiger of the east. Ieyasu bent every rule the dead man had left and gathered friends and waited for his moment. Everyone could feel the storm coming. 2 great factions, 100 proud lords, a helpless child at the center, and a whole country holding its breath. It would all come down to a single day. The armies gathered in the autumn of 1600, nearly 200,000 men in all, marching to a narrow, misty valley in the mountains where a village stood at a crossroads. Its name was Sekigahara. They came together in fog and rain, in the cold, gray dawn. The Western army held the high ground, well placed, and by the numbers on paper, Ieyasu's side was in real danger of defeat. But Ieyasu had not spent his life learning patience for nothing. In the weeks before, he had been busy in the dark, writing letters, making promises, buying men. Several of the enemy's own commanders had secretly agreed to betray their side. When the fog lifted, the battle began, and it was savage. For hours, the 2 great hosts ground against each other in the mud, and neither could break the other. It hung in the balance, and it could have gone either way. The key lay on a hillside, where a young lord named Kobayakawa sat with a great force, one of the secret traitors sworn to Ieyasu, but frozen, hesitating, watching to see which way the wind would blow. Ieyasu, watching from below, grew impatient with the waiting man, and so he did a bold and brutal thing. He ordered his own gunners to fire upon the hesitant traitor's position to force his hand. The volley struck home like a slap. Terrified and exposed, the young lord made his choice at last. He charged, not at Ieyasu, but down into the flank of his own allies, and the whole battle turned. Betrayed from within, the Western army crumpled and collapsed. What had been a desperate deadlock became, in an hour, a total rout. By that same afternoon, it was over. Ieyasu had won the greatest battle in the history of Japan. The proud Ishida Mitsunari was hunted down and captured, and went to his death with his head unbowed, still certain he had served the right cause. And with him fell the last real barrier between Ieyasu and the whole of Japan. Now Ieyasu held real power over all Japan, but he was far too careful a man to simply seize a crown and call himself master. He had watched what pride and haste had done to Nobunaga and to Hideyoshi. He would do it properly. So he reached back into the ancient past and took up the oldest and most respected title of all, one Hideyoshi the peasant had never been allowed to claim. In 1603, the emperor named him Shogun, supreme military ruler of the realm. From his rebuilt city of Edo, he now ruled the country. And he set about the real work of his old age, not conquering Japan, but binding it so tightly and so cleverly that it could never fly apart again. He bound the great lords with careful laws, hostages, and duties. He fixed each in his place, watched them all, and made rebellion slow and costly and nearly impossible. Every strand of the web ran back to Edo. And then he did the cleverest thing of all. After only 2 years, he stepped down as shogun and gave the title to his son. He wanted the whole world to see that this was no fleeting prize won by one strong man. It was a dynasty. He himself did not truly let go. As the retired lord, the Ogosho, he ruled quietly from behind the throne, guiding his son, guarding his house, tying off every loose end. But one great loose end remained. For down in the mighty fortress of Osaka still lived the one thing that could undo it all, the son of Hideyoshi. The boy Hideyori, now grown, the true heir of the man Ieyasu had sworn to protect. Around that young man gathered all who still resented the Tokugawa, masterless samurai, old loyalists, the disinherited, and the bitter. Osaka became a magnet for every enemy Ieyasu had. It could not be allowed to stand. Ieyasu was old now, past 70, and he knew he had not many years left. He would not leave this danger for his heirs. The patient man, at the very end, decided the waiting was finally over. He found his pretext in a temple bell, a cast inscription he chose to read as a deadly insult to his name. It was a thin excuse, and everyone knew it, but it was enough. He raised his armies and marched on Osaka. The great castle of Osaka was thought to be unconquerable, vast walls, deep moats, and a huge garrison of desperate, skilled defenders. His first great winter assault battered against it in vain and could not break in. So the old tiger fell back on cunning, as he always had. He made a false peace, and as a condition, had the great outer moats filled in, stripping the fortress of its finest defenses. Then, in the spring, he came again. This time the castle was naked. His armies stormed in, and the fighting was terrible, street by street and gate by gate, until the great fortress of Osaka was wrapped in flame and falling. And there, in the burning ruin, the last of Hideyoshi's line perished, the young heir, and his mother, and his hopes, all gone in the smoke. The house of the peasant who had ruled Japan was wiped away, and nothing now stood against the Tokugawa. With Osaka fallen, it was finished. The last enemy was gone. After 150 years of unbroken war, all of Japan lay quiet at last, held firmly in a single steady hand. Ieyasu did not live long to enjoy it. The next year, in 1616, old and content, his great work done, the patient tiger died quietly in his bed, one of the very few great lords of that age to do so. But what he left behind was extraordinary. The order he built was so strong, so clever, so complete, that it held Japan in unbroken peace not for a year, not for a generation, but for 250 years. For 2.5 centuries, under his descendants, there were no great wars. The arts flourished, the cities grew rich, and the common people lived out their lives without armies burning their fields. It was the longest peace his country had ever known. And after his death, they honored him as few men are ever honored. He was enshrined as a god, a great guardian spirit, in a magnificent shrine deep in the mountains at Nikko, where he is revered to this day. Now let us return, as I promised, to that old riddle of the little bird that would not sing, for now it will tell you everything. Nobunaga, they said, would kill the bird that would not sing. Hideyoshi would coax and charm it into singing. But Ieyasu only folded his hands and said, "I will wait until it sings." And that, in the end, was the whole secret of the man. Nobunaga broke the old world with fire and died by treachery. Hideyoshi built the new one with dazzling energy and saw it die with him. But Ieyasu simply outlasted them both. He endured the hostage cage, the death of his son, the crushing defeats, the long humiliations, and he waited and waited until at last everything he wanted fell quietly into his open hands. He was not the most brilliant of the three, nor the boldest, nor the most beloved, but he understood the one thing the others never quite did, that time itself is the most patient and pitiless weapon of all. So tonight, when the world seems to rush and clamor, remember the patient tiger of the East, who won everything by refusing to break. Let the lamp burn down. The cherry blossoms are falling. Rest now, sleep well.